Erev Tov, everyone. We begin to read Chumash Dvorim this week, the final of the 5 books of the Chumash. So Chumash Dvorim basically was written by Moshe Rabbeinu. It differs from the other 4 books. The other 4 books are a direct dictation, so to speak, of the Rabbanu Shalom told him what to write, and he wrote. Here Moshe wrote, because I'll say, and the Rabbanu Shalom approved it. There are Moshe Rabbeinu, there's like 4 books. You can see that also in the style of some of the parshios, etc. Because of that, the Gemara discusses whether the rules, the Yud Gimel Midos Shator and Idreshes by him, the 13 principles by which we are able to extract halacha from the words, in other words, to deal with Torah Shabbal Peh, whether those rules apply to Chumash Dvorim as well. Do they apply to what Moshe said? So there is an opinion in the Gemara that, for instance, one of the methods of understanding Torah is called the Gzeira Shova. Gzeira Shova means if the word appears in one place and the same word appears in another place, so many times you can understand what the halacha is in the other place by knowing what it was in the first place. And the unity of the words creates the halacha. So that, Rabbi Yehuda says, that applies in the first 4 books of the Torah, because they are, so to speak, the Dvar Hashem. So therefore, there's no prose, there's no poetry, there's no style. It's all there for the purpose of Torah. Masha'enkein in Chumash Dvorim, he's of the opinion that there's no way to make a Gzeira Shova because the words are basically Moshe's, even though heaven agreed to them, and even though every word is holy. There are those that disagree with him, but there is no question that Chumash Dvorim is treated differently. And what is interesting is that Chumash Dvorim contains mitzvot that were not mentioned before. In other words, the Torah would have stopped at the end of Maseh, which is the end of the narrative part of the Torah, right? Klal Yisrael is Never Yarden. They settled up with Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. They settled up with the Bnei Slavchad. They destroyed Midian. Everything, all the scores are settled, and they're ready to go into Eretz Yisrael. And that's the end. Chazak, chazak, when it's chazak. So where was the halacha of Kan Tzipor, for instance, and other mitzvot that appear in Parshat Kiteitzei and in other places in the in Chumash Dvorim? And the main mitzvah that the Meforshim all discuss, V'shavta Hashem Elokecha, the mitzvah of tshuva, is that a mitzvah or not? That's in Chumash Dvorim. It doesn't appear. So what would have been before? So the Meforshim say, very delicately, they say that we would have known those mitzvahs, but they would have been in what we call halacha l'Moshe Sinai. When Moshe was on Sinai, he received instructions. Tefillin are supposed to be black. How to build a sukkah. What creates order? So those are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So Kan Tzipor would also have been halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Now that it's written in the Torah because of Chumash Dvarim, it ascends to the level of being one of the Taryag mitzvahs, and because of the fact that it is specifically discussed in the Torah, and those ideas are present. So we would have known everything anyway, but the question is, what would the status have been? And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu's oratory here, so to speak, that the Rebbeinu Shalom was masking to, raises it to the level of, as though it were written, and it's a mitzvah min Torah that's written in the Torah. So in effect, Moshe explains that to us because it says, Eila advorim asher diber Moshe ish alakim v'nei Yisrael lifnei Moso. This is what he said. It says, Hoil Moshe ba'eretz haTorah azos. So what does the word Hoil mean? So Rashi says Hoil is hitchil. He began. What did he begin? So the simple explanation is he begins to review the story of Klal Yisrael in the desert. This tells about Yetzias Mitzrayim, Ma'aser Egel, Ma'amad Har Sinai, the Meraglim, all the stories that we had before are going to be reviewed here by Moshe. But you will notice that it's always with a slight variation. It's not exactly the way it was written in Chumash Shmos or in Bamidbar. Before she point out, there's a famous parish, the Chumash Dvarim, from Reb David Tzvi Hoffman. Reb David Tzvi Hoffman was the rector, meaning the Rosh Yeshiva of Hildesheimer's Yeshiva in Berlin in the late 1890s and early 1900s. It was a Gaon Olam. And he has a famous sefer of Shilas and Shuvas called Lamed Lahoil, that for many generations was the basic of what we could call modern psak, because he dealt with issues. The Jews in Germany were in a different situation than the Jews that were in Eastern Europe, and they faced different challenges. And in fact, the yeshiva itself that he attended, that he headed, was the yeshiva that included secular studies, and that many of their graduates had doctoral degrees, etc. So he has a parish to Chumash, but the parish is only to 3 of the 5 Chumashim. The Chumash Bereshis, which he undertakes to deal with creation, which is a never-ending subject. And then the Chumash Vayikra, dealing with Torah's Kohanim. And then Chumash Dvarim. And he points out how in Chumash Dvarim, Moshe Rabbeinu lays the foundation for Torah Shebaal Peh. In other words, Torah Shebaal Peh came with Moshe on Sinai. That's what Rashi means in Bahar is Ma Shmita Misinai, Kol HaMitzvos Misinai. The structure of Torah is from Sinai. The structure of Torah is built upon the oral law. You cannot understand the written law without the oral law. And if you do, then you misunderstand it. As we have seen time and again in Jewish history, that unfortunately those that rejected Chazal and rejected the oral law and tried to deal with the written law ended up writing their own oral law. That happened to the Karoim, that happened to the Tzdokim, that happens to reform in our time, right? That's to always explain itself. So Hoil Moshe Hitzchil, he began the process of Torah Shebaal Peh. He began the process that the Jewish people had to understand. There's an advertisement on the radio that drives me, most of the radio drives me mad. But it says, Rako uvdot medabrot, only facts talk. And then they give you a half hour of opinion. Because there is no such thing as a fact. The fact is in the eye of the beholder. How it's reported. What did the person see? What's the conclusion from the fact? So what do you mean the facts medabrot? They tell you. What do they tell you? So then you have to say the parish of what they tell you. So Moshe introduced that concept to Klal Yisrael. That when you deal with the Torah, you have to deal with the Torah Shebaal Peh. And we have numerous Perushim of great Gaonim throughout the ages that do nothing but reconcile the words of Torah Shebaal Peh to the words that are written in Torah Shebiksav, to show you how it's written in the words itself, so that you know what that opinion was. So if you want to know how Moshe saw the Ma'aseh Egel, so Moshe is telling you, is that the fact? In the Torah, there's slight discrepancies. It's hard to know that the heaven sees things one way and we see things another way. And even things that we are certain of, they're not certain. You know, the Quaker said, everything is certain but me and thee, and I'm not certain of thee. There's no certainty. It's all given to interpretation. And that's why the idea of emunah and the idea of Mesorah play this vital role in Jewish life. So you have an emunah chachomim, that they had an interpretation that was Misinai, and we rely on that. And that's what carried us through all the ages. And any of those that deviated from it, unfortunately, over time, found themselves in the wilderness and outside the pale of Judaism and the Jewish people. So therefore, the Torah emphasized it. Hoil Moshe ba'eretz haTorah hazos. Moshe began the process to explain the Torah, to work on the Torah. And Chazal say that every new idea that any Talmud Chacham in any generation had or will have is included in what Moshe gave us from Sinai, because the Torah is unending. The depth of it is beyond our comprehension. And therefore, every generation and every person can see in the Torah greatness and see in it something new and a quality that he or the generation needs in order to be able to deal with the world that it exists in. Rabbi Chananya ben Akashi, Omer Ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu, L'zakas Yisrael, Avicha Hir B'Lahem Torah Mitzvot, Shenemar, Adonai Chafetz Aman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadil.